Fellow travelers, join us on a journey into dissonance, a sense-making sojourn through humanist nightmare fuel. If you are receiving this transmission, then you too are part of the resistance.
In today's stream, we go deep into cluster B personality disorders and how they affect the decision-making of people from opposite ends of the social-economical scale. From QAnon members searching frantically for a cause, to members of my own community looking for an opinion they trust in order to make informed decisions about their health. Our common denominator? Influencers. So is there a measured way to filter through the open market of ideas? Let's listen in to find out.
That's kind of what we're getting into, right? This idea, and I'll say it for all the people that have awareness about these things, that no, one cannot take a psychological assessment or a framework that is intended for individuals and kind of generalize it to populations. That's not really what that's meant for. Like, you're not diagnosing a population. You can't really do that. And there are people who try to do that, right? Like, that's not a really good thing to do. Psychology, mental health, behavioral health, and in the space that we occupy, it's developmental health, well-being, the sustaining of that developmental process. I mean, even just the idea of saying developing intentionally, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people who develop in a very reactionary way or develop in a very trauma-informed way. And we know what that development yields, right? It yields some real damage. But there are people in this, I'll show my boomer creds with this and just be like, in this day and age, right? So in this day and age, we have the benefit of individuals simultaneously existing as concepts, that they're called influencers. Like there are messages that proliferate in these massive ways, especially by some high profile folks like Joe Rogan, right? Like Joe Rogan being very deeply criticized of late, but also probably in the past 8 to 10 months, deeply criticized for continuing on his arc of kind of, slipping from libertarian, centrist to libertarian to conservative to a very, kind of having more authoritarian sensibilities or anti-authoritarian sensibilities where such authoritarianism doesn't exist, right? So, or it can be argued not to exist. So Joe Rogan, in one sense, is like, what are they doing with this vaccine, COVID vaccine, right? And yet, what he's saying is the COVID vaccine. I mean, he's comfortably settling in a space where he and other individuals that he has on his incredibly well-watched broadcast, internationally watched and held in high regard. And I will say hundreds of episodes of content that I have watched back in the day, back from 2012 when Joe was first getting into this, and the people he had on, and the stuff that they talked about, and the places they went to, and they went deep, and they went into the deep end of the pool in a very accessible way for a lot of people. And yet when they went into the deep end of the pool, they went to really well informed spaces, right? So they were awesome in that way, and they are certainly awesome in that way now. They deliver excellent content. However, though it's not the delivery that's changed, the messaging has changed, right? So now there's this sense that Joe and his closest Confederates, kind of have this messaging around what are they doing? They are trying to change things. They are trying to impose things that are, on us as a society that are incredibly draconian, incredibly fascistic, incredibly, it's almost like, in one sense, there are a lot of people who are, anti-authoritarian, and you would expect them to be people who would also be, end prison slavery, or, be, like healthcare for all, or be those things, but
yeah,
they're not. They're conservatives. They have a very conservative mindset that spills out into places where they're not just arguing against, the messaging around vaccination for COVID-19. They're arguing against the messaging of BLM, right? And that BLM is the left trying to flex socially, and they're upset that many people in high political spaces, high entertainment spaces, are very supportive of leftist agendas, which are, leftist agendas, but let's try, like, things that can be kind of broken down in certain ways. Like, I would consider myself a leftist and a progressive, but that's because, in one of the ways that most impacts my way of thinking about society, there is the idea of government interventionalism, which sounds immediately like something that Joe Rogan would hate. But I really enjoy government interventionalism in a country where I can rely on so many outlets for interventionalism, because if there weren't the outlets that even in a very basic way brought certain needs to us, we'd be fucked.
Yeah.
Right? Like, government interventionalism is when the housing authority works, is when the free clinic works, is when, you can complain all you want about the worst F schools in your area, but your kids get to go to school. And there is much that can be done about that, but the fact that that exists is incredibly beneficial for many, many people.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's a very dark side of government interventionalism, and there's very much, stuff that maybe if you watch Joe, you might be like, I don't know. Yeah, fuck that. I like, why are they so up on this vaccination thing? Like, tell me that, at least, in your experience, relative to, and, we speak as freely and comfortably as we feel to speak on this stream, on this, podcast that we do, whatever the case is. So I'll be forthright, because a lot of people aren't. A lot of people like hesitate from that
To
kind
say
of thing.
anything.
But
Yeah.
I am, got my 2 Pfizers, and then I got my booster. And if there are studies coming out of Israel and other spaces where they are really, collecting good data on the efficacy of a second booster, so that's 4 shots,
Right.
I'm going to get that 4th shot, not because I'm panicking about my health, not because I am blindly observant of all things that the government chooses to do, but I am independently convinced of the efficacy, not just the science of virology and the science of infectious diseases and the science of vaccination, but because people argue all of those things, right?
Yeah.
But just convinced of the intentionality of a collective of global health organizations and entities. So it's not just here, it's in countries all over the place that have different ideas and different political ruling parties and all sorts of stuff, but that's where they're going. And yes, there are studies now coming out about the idea of we can certainly do well to gain, you know, kind of herd immunity or global herd immunity with COVID-19 if we get it, if we all eventually get it. But it's like, you know, I got a cold or I got the flu and I got through it. It becomes like the flu, basically. So people still get the flu vaccine. People don't get the flu vaccine. The flu's not so bad, right? If COVID could become like that, like, yeah, I'm getting my COVID vaccine. Oh, it's time of that time of year is January, COVID vaccine, and go get it and get the flu vaccine at the same time, then I'll do that. Like, that's me, right? Yeah. But other people haven't done that. How was your journey? How do you come to the idea of like dealing with the vaccination concept or the idea?
Well, first off, like, I have understanding for people who are like, you know, I don't want to get it. And there's so many different reasons, you know, so I won't say that I agree with all of the reasons but like, I understand, I think the fear behind it, I recognize that because I was terrified of really just like that like what you said, like the other side, the dark side of like, you know, government interference. And like, there has been just a lot of mistrust built over the years for me. But like what really, well, first off, I work in spaces where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to need this vaccine. I'm definitely going to get it. So I had that plan, but I still kind of like took my time and like other things everything's happened. I was just kind of like slowly like, all right, I'm going to get it at some point. And then I got COVID. And so did my kids. And I'm not saying like, oh, well, I definitely wouldn't have got it if this or anything like that. It really kind of changed my perception to see my kids so ill and like me so ill and like barely be able to like help them. Like that was, and it changed my perception, like feeling it too, and like imagining an older person, like even in my own family, but like anyone that I'm around becoming sick because I didn't want to take, you know, extra precautions. Or really what for me, it was like, I already decided that I'm going to do this, but I'm just kind of like taking my time. And meanwhile, my family was really affected. So I did get vaccinated. It's not time for me to get my booster yet, but I also got my kids vaccinated, which is a challenging thing. Like people really do sometimes, like I had a friend of mine actually, but like someone just respond to me and like, I was like, oh yeah, I got my vaccination. And they like looked at me like, I'm like, why are you looking at me like I'm the most disgusting person for getting a vaccine?
What was their vibe? What was that like? Why are you trusting the government? Like, what was the
they wouldn't even explain it exactly. It was like there was no explanation, but it was just this automatic mistrust. And I was kind of left to translate that however. Like,
so here's the thing, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot about perhaps a cluster B disorders epidemic, you know, that has been like, you know, they say with coronavirus and COVID-19, you know, it was the wet markets where people sell all these like freshly dead animals and things like that. And basically they, you know, said, okay, this is where this virus bred, and this is where it initially burst out of and went into different spaces and eventually, made its way worldwide. And so there was this sense that there is a ground zero, perhaps. People have argued that and been back and forth about that, but there is a ground zero, or there is a space, there is an incubation space, right? So I think the proliferation of the ability for people like you and me to say, hey, we've got something to say, and we're gonna say it, and we're gonna do it on YouTube, and we're gonna Twitch stream, and we're gonna make our opinion heard because it's important, and everybody feels that way, right? And people feel that way, so they do that. And as people saw perhaps individuals become quite adept at this kind of communication, right? On the interwebs, on social media, on the net, on the web. I said that to my son something the other day, hey, I didn't say net. I said, look it up on the web, right?
Yeah.
And he looks at me like,
what's that?
no, he knew.
I know he
like,
knew, but
he was like, and he looks at me, he's like, should I look it up on the World Wide Web, Dad? I'm like,
don't you love it?
Okay, buddy boy.
Don't you love it when your kids make you really feel like your age? Yeah.
Let me just say to everybody on that watches, right, that just so you can build your judgment of me as we go along, as we know whatever kind of person that I am, and judge heavily the cluster B spaces that I dwell in as well. But I finished my master's degree. Is that fair to say? No, that's not fair to say. Let's just say I predominantly worked through my master's degree in the late 90s without or looking shit up in physical spaces. Yeah. There's this thing, youngsters, that it used to exist. You used to physically go somewhere to do something, right? Like it was a crazy concept. But here's the thing. Here's the reality of that in terms of, kind of circling back. We went on a little tangent, but circling back to government interventionism, circling back to those perceptions, circling back to the idea of taking the COVID vaccine and government, and having a lot of ideas about against the government, a lot of streams, a lot of YouTube content, a lot of deep dives about government, right? From big people to people that don't have as many followers and viewers and audience. The idea there is, we can say something from a certain place that we occupy, right? Like Joe Rogan may exist in a place where quite possibly the only government interventionism that he can feel, given the wealth he has amassed and given the accessibility that privilege purchases for him, maybe the only government interventionism he feels that he can struggle against is a vaccine mandate. Like if the state of Texas, where he is now, just mandated, right, that. Mm-hmm. But let's talk to Joe, right? So Nadine, you talk to Joe a little bit and you let him know about the idea that government getting up in your face isn't that uncommon for many, many, many people. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, and it's funny because when you were describing, like, feeling like the only thing, that's the only thing I have left to control is like what goes in my veins. Like
Right.
And that is a real thing. I think that people, including myself, have felt like, and that can get in the way of like you making the decision to to do something that is healthy. Like it can really cloud your judgment because there is so much, not just control, but like abuse. And, while on the one hand, with like, let's just say like housing, I am so thankful that I have it to be able to, prosper my family, to be able to have a safe and like secure place to build, my life. But on the other hand, like there is a real, consideration like that. Like there's like a runaround, that happens, that even if I'm doing the absolute everything that I'm supposed to be doing, there's still some sort of chaos that happens just in that system, even if it's a fault of someone that works with that system, like a caseworker or something. I'm still at fault. And that, that's like a very small example, honestly. That's not even the craziest example, but that happening in every space that's supposed to be helpful for you can just box you in so much where you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't even breathe. I can't even move without like bumping into something that, is threatening my livelihood and my kids' livelihood. Mm-hmm. And then not even just the vaccination, I think also people I know I was responding to just being quarantined for so long. And then on top of it was like, I've been forced to be in this sort of position and have things limited where I was already limited. My access to a lot of things were already limited. So I'm even more limited. That also can cloud your judgment. Like, should I go out and do this thing? Is there a way for me to like, not have, like, is there a way I can limit what I'm doing? But it's difficult to think in that way and make that decision without being emotional about like how much you're already like limited.
Okay, so let's do this, right? Because there's people that have different levels of concern, but different levels also of maybe even activism. Yeah, like I think you call that. Like, I think like we're talking about Joe Rogan. I don't know if Joe would consider himself that. I think he's always tried to stay very objective and even keeled, and he feels like he's very much on the middle path, as the Buddha said, neither too loose nor too tight, like it's just very like that, the Goldilocks zone of political and social commentary, right? But maybe now maybe he says that in private because he is a strong voice on, basically this is the idea. It's on vaccine or anti-vaccination perhaps, and it's anti-vax, but even in the health space, we say vaccine hesitancy, right? So to be fair, right, yeah. I don't think Joe would be considered vaccine hesitant. I think he's very, like, nope, yeah. Nope, right? Like this is a government overreach, right? I don't know, how does that sit with you, like, because if Joe has a lot of privilege, I have far less privilege than Joe, you have far less privilege than Joe, and there's different places that we have to be responsive to that we are not as, we don't feel so distant from, right? We feel like there are aspects of life in terms of the social structures that we exist in that can really reach out and touch us very easily, right? Joe may not feel that way. Joe may feel like those hands are very distant, so he can like pop up and just be like, yeah, Dr. Fauci, you know, what does Fauci know? Bro, like, come on, man. You know? Or even like when he like, I remember it was with Fauci, it was with Sanjay Gupta of CNN. Like, I mean, Joe's kind of, you know, it's like getting a little big for your britches there, son. You know, like, I mean, relax, bro. Like, it's not, you're questioning stuff in this gotcha, you know, mentality, whereas there's nuance to what we're talking about here, right? So I remember when, you know, we were talking and I'd said to you relative to the vaccine, I was like, well, you know, like I'm doing this because everyone, I mean, it's also the personal situations. Like my mom and my grandmother, who by the look in my fat old face, like you can know are not exactly, you know, midlife, you know, they got COVID because my mom is a physician. She works in public health, community health spaces, and there's a lot of here, back there, this, that, and the other. And back in March 2020, when everything was first, like I remember I'd been going to conferences. I went to that thing, the participatory defense thing in January, and then I went to, I guess it was a Carnegie thing or it was something like in February. And I remember being in Pensacola with a colleague. I think we were doing something with the University of West Florida, and that was like when it was like just like that end of February, I guess, beginning of March. It was like you know, Fat Tuesday and all of that, right? So it was like that kind of thing. And we were just like, woo, you know, like just like all over Pensacola. And then we came, you know, there were like little mentions of this, but suddenly we came back or just at the tail end of that, like everything started blowing up about COVID, right? And we were like, oh my God. I was like, I definitely think I have COVID. You know, like how can I not? We were like elbow to elbow with strangers, hundreds of people. But I don't know what happened. Maybe I just like, I mean, I always think I must have gotten COVID and I was asymptomatic, but like because I was okay, because there was no testing. There was none of that stuff existed, right? So then somebody in my mom's office up in New York tested, and then she was like, well, you know, you know, not necessarily how people are frontline workers, but they are on the front. She was on one of the front lines of healthcare in that she was in community clinics in Brooklyn,
right,
and working with folks. And so she definitely had to get tested. And then my grandmother lives with her, and, you know, they both tested positive, or my mom tested positive. And we definitely, because my grandmother also started to show symptoms soon after, like about a day, they were about 36 hours apart in terms of when the symptoms onset, right? Like probably like how you and your kids were. And you know, I thought, oh, I'm definitely gonna lose my mom and my grandmother. And it was that horror of they're going to be put on heavy ventilation, intubated, you know, like everything's shutting down, and you can't go in. So like they're going to die when nobody can see them and they're alone, and they'll just be there. And this is my final time, and I can't go up and see them because it was terrifying. Like at that time, it was like zombie virus, right?
Yeah.
Like it was like terrifying. So nobody, they were like quarantined, and I was on like, you know, sometimes like she doesn't answer her phone or she doesn't answer FaceTime or something. And it's like, oh my gosh, all of that was happening. And that's the problem. There's nuance, right? There are some things that Joe Rogan says that one can consider a little deeper, but then there are some things that are said that, you know, are about the flippant and non-evidence-based statements like, it's just like the flu. Like, a lot of people say that, but when Joe says it, and he has millions of followers, and people take his word over the word of healthcare experts and providers, if anything, like, maybe you're even right, bro. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's all just nothing like the flu, even though it's not, and we can evidence that in 3,000 different ways at this point, right? But even in anecdotal ways and broader evidence-based ways, right? We can say that, but why be such a dick about it, right? Like, what? Why? Like, there's a lot. You can say that it's just like the flu, and you can say it's just the flu numbers, but bro, when as many people as have died have 3 to 4 times as many people around them that are affected by the loss of that person, why would you be such a fucking twat about it? Is because you get so removed in certain ways that have been produced or created for us in these virtual spaces, right? Like, you know, everyone's like, oh, the metaverse, what's it gonna be like? Bro, the metaverse is happening. It's this is it. Right. This is what's happening. And there are cultures, and there are groups, and there are tribes forming. There is so much happening. There's flame wars on Twitter and YouTube and Twitch and on Reddit and subreddits that people have, and all this kind of stuff, all about, like, who's winning. There's an entire culture of debate, and some of them I like to watch, but you're debating stuff in ways that are almost approaching this weird threshold of where you think the debate is more important than the actual issues. Like, you're debating COVID vaccination, but not really even on either side of that debate really that sensitive to the actual shit that's happening relative to people's lives. Like, that's the only thing. That's why, I mean, you know, in our work that we do, it is a work that's very much, there's social relevance, there's great social relevance to it, whether it's spaces of houselessness in our community, spaces of food insecurity in our community, spaces of lack of access to healthcare and education in our community, incarceration and its effects throughout the cycle of incarceration as you leave and come back into community, and the recidivism and what happens in our community. Are we noticing a pattern here, folks?
Yeah.
When you get on this space and you don't connect people to the macro social, the intra and interpersonal to the macro social, then somehow you turn into an asshole like Joe Rogan. Like, not you know, not in terms of, like, you know, I can, it's like, what happened, bro? What happened? You were so good for this world at a time when a lot of people who didn't have access to the idea of pulling aside the veil and seeing things in a different way, just changing your stance a little bit and seeing things in a different way. Joe Rogan's work was mind-opening for people. And now what? It's mind closing. It's because of this idea that there are individuals, like human beings, like Joe Rogan, but he is a monolith now. He is this impact haver He's an influencer of the biggest of the big, and yet he's also a person. And there are aspects of issues that individual people face and deal with in their daily lives that they do carry forward and have impacts on people who are coworkers or people in their own family, their children, their spouses, their partners, their friend circle and friend base, their, I don't know, they're definitely in workplaces. I've definitely experienced this, and I know you have, perhaps more recently than not, in workplaces. Inside joke, folks. But that's the thing. We're talking about things in macro social spaces, but we also relate that to, everyone is so afraid of, oh, that is anecdotal experience you're talking about. Bro, it's mixed methods, right? Like, the issue is you can't just, everything's not a survey analysis, right? Sometimes you have qualitative, you have quantitative data, you have qualitative data. Qualitative data has anecdotal input, but it also has rigorous data collection methods that provide, and it's arguable, the quantitative people will always say, that's all just fuzzy. That's fuzzy woo stuff. Great, man. I say there's information gathering that occurs on a continuum, and you can gather some types of very valid information here that you can't gather over here, right? This is one of those qualitative spaces, and yet there is this consideration that the bridge of social media influence is taking perhaps individual issues that occur with individual people, but it's just like it impacts your coworkers at work or your families or your circle of friends. Here it's affecting your circle, but that circle is millions of people, right? Like, that's how big your tribe is. Like Joe Rogan's followers, disciples, acolytes. I mean, what can you call? I mean, it's his influence is bigger than some religions. I wonder if someone has that, that we could easily, I don't want to just kind of tangential, jump into that at this point. It's not that as important, but actually, at some point I want to look that up. Like, I wonder how, and it's not just Joe, it's a lot of different people on YouTube. I mean, my son deals with certain individuals on YouTube, they're YouTube influencers, and they have a different kind of schema. It's not just this kind of talking, but it's, it's Twitch streaming, it's gaming and talking, and it's a lot of it's about something that's happening here in life, something's happening there, something's happening in game, and then suddenly it's talking about something that's happening in life. And usually it's the ideas about, the ideas about something that comes up, and I try to be very open with my son as we move back and forth around these issues that come up. And I told you about that the other day, that there was some flame war that was happening, and there is an individual that was being called out on either on stream or on Twitter for basically I think he made some kind of, perhaps thinking that it was a super woke thing to do or whatever the case is, made some kind of public apology for several years ago when I believe he was 20, but this individual that he engaged with, it's unclear, but inappropriate ways, and this is his own telling, that he came out
Right.
with, and somebody else had some other information and this and that, because there was no criminal act that was charged, there was no offense, there was no allegations. This was all just, that's the whole thing, it's in the public sphere.
Yeah.
And there's this whole thing happening about pedophilia and the idea of real discussions around sexual trauma and sexual abuse, but also batshit crazy stuff around it's the Illuminati and they like to have sex with children and then eat their pituitary glands. And that's like real, that's not me, that's real. That's a real, millions of people believe. That's, you asked about QAnon the other day, and we'll go into QAnon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what we're talking about. And all of that all just happened in the span of these Twitter bursts. And my son, who is 12, engaged some peripheral aspect of that and came to me and said, okay, let's get into pedophilia and let's get into, he was like, hey dad, and I'm like, and he's like, so pedophile and molesting and what's right and wrong, and I mean, not stuff that's just like, why is this bad, why is that bad? I believe, did I just mention that the individual is 14, so 20 and 14, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my son's mother is a good 5 years younger than me, and that was all fine.
Right.
But when I was a senior in high school and she was in 8th grade, probably not so much.
Right.
Right? Like that wouldn't have been awesome, right? Like, how you doing? It's like, no, you are clearly
oh my God,
engaging in some. I mean, when I say clearly, in the sense that, like we knew, like, that's it's, we're not gonna do that, because there was a different type of community. Like, people often say that when people said things before the internet, then you couldn't check that stuff, right? Like, people just said things, and that's when dictators and community leaders and people who had just some charisma got in front of everybody. But now you can check people's, okay, first of all, how does that even work? Because our most recent president prior to Joe Biden, Donald J. Trump, was a phenomenally charismatic individual who utilized this new space to his benefit. He, as can be, I mean, there are people who have at a distance diagnosed him and said all sorts of stuff about him, but we can say safely that if these, which are here listed under DSM level specificity, right? If these ideas can be said to be in the realm of accuracy when it comes to diagnosis, and even the idea of how, lots of YouTube content around how do you recognize these kinds of people. I believe you have benefited from something in terms of people in your life that you needed to understand a little bit better.
Yeah.
And some of these models, you didn't diagnose the person, you don't have the qualifications to diagnose that person, but it helped, right? Mm-hmm. And so in that same space, one can say that safely Donald J. Trump existed across this continuum. Some would argue maybe up here a lot more, but we'll safely say maybe under borderline and NPD right here, right? But the proliferation of all these different sources of information through social didn't stop Trump, didn't check Trump. Plenty of fact checking occurred, but the cult of personality soared high above any of that fact checking. So it's not like all of that fact checking, like, back in the day, there was less of a way to background check somebody, but there was far more checks and balances in place because we weren't at such a distance from our influencers, right? Our influencers folks, you may not believe it, but there was actually television and radio back in the day, right? We had those things and they worked, and there were certainly influencers, but we recognized the distance, right? We recognized they're on 60 Minutes. So,
right.
We're going to talk about it out when we're playing ball, or when we're at work, or when we're meeting up for whatever drinks, whatever. We're gonna do it in all those third houses, right? The third house concept was introduced to me by a friend. I'm not going to go deep into that now, and it comes from an anthropologist's book, that the third house was a place that in your community space, right? You had your first house, first place. It was called the third place, not the third house. Third house is the bookstore that we did a lot of cool podcasts at. What was it? In community. That is correct. Right? All community based, right? There's something to that, folks. And community doesn't have to be in your brick and mortar community. It can be in plenty of other places. But what we're moving into here is the idea that back in the day, when communities didn't exist at such, not even a distance, like the fact that you're in community with someone in Germany, but they're like just a chat, you're just going back and forth about politics and nationalism in your communities and whatnot. It feels like you're close, but you're actually not. Now, the metaverse may try to fix that in the sense that it may try to actually make you feel, as you're there, like you're in the same room and engaging in whatnot. Maybe that'll change it. But here's the thing. In life before all of this, we were in community with our friends, and we were out and we talked about stuff. And here was what really worked, right? There wasn't anonymity. That's the big important thing. You were in front of your friends. And when, let's say if Nadine and I were talking and she came up and said, that's some bullshit. They need to take that vaccine and stop trying to inject, whatever. Well, what are we going to inject? What are we going to inject? We're going to inject a tracker chip. We're going to inject a secret hormone that is turning everyone into, like, what did Alex Jones say, right? The gays, right? Like all of that. I'm not going to try. There's a million impressions of this guy, but the idea of, like those COVID vaccines are turning us gay. Those kind of things can be said. But when you came to the pub, or you came to the coffee shop, or you came to the house, to the crib, and you sat down and you talk shit, it'd be like, what the fuck are you saying, man? Like, where did you get that? Where did you read? Back in the day, that was like National Enquirer. Remember that? Like those crazy ass magazines, like that was tabloid shit. Now tabloid shit exists in the same space. Like Joe Rogan is making tabloid level claims,
right?
Which he has now been proven to be wrong about, in the same space as academic claims around a thing, right? And here's the thing, I agree with that. We agree with that. We agree with it because we come into this space and everything should exist. I love that very conservative ideology of the marketplace of ideas. It's not really, because it has lots of control. Like, when was the last time you felt like you were in the marketplace of ideas?
Where's that? Can you tell me? Point it out to me, please. I have ideas.
You got ideas?
I have plenty of ideas, yes.
Well, here we are, Nadine. here we are. This is our entry into that marketplace. Will we be allowed in? I don't know. Maybe
Tune in next week.
Yeah, tune in next week, right? But I think this is important to say, because maybe we'll even do this, folks. Like, this might only proliferate locally, and if that's the case, that's the case. But we're trying to talk about larger things here, right?
Yeah.
And that concept that we're trying to laboriously arrive at is perhaps individuals who carry some of these traits with them on an individual basis have transformed, right? That they've taken a new form in society as larger than life individuals, but people feel like Joe, like, who am I talking about? Joe? I don't know Joe Rogan, but there's so much content, and it's at such a intimate level, like laying around on a sofa and watching it, being like, oh yeah, totally. And it's just such an easy, like, you're in your room, I'm in my room, we're just talking. And at some point, maybe there will be 1,000 people, just like, oh yeah, we're talking too. And then we'll stream live and people will be talking. See, that's how it happens. And suddenly you're building up an affinity of certain things, right? Like here, an affinity of people who have a need for admiration. Like they're all feeding off of each other, right? There's a leader, and then there's other people who agree with what that person is saying, and so they start moving into that space, right? There may be people who have identity issues and they're seeking that particular place, and there's a person who fills that gap, and so people seek identity in that person. But then that person's particular set of whatever it may be, intense emotions, right? Instability in relationships. There's flame wars that happen constantly. Somebody says something about somebody else, then that person does. It's like remember revenge porn? Like somebody fucked you over, so you fuck somebody else and then posted that. That's what people are now doing, but intellectually and verbally and in very well produced, smart, intelligent ways, right? But it's still revenge. It's like, oh yeah, bitch. Boom. So it's like, it's like mic battles. You pass that mic, but it's not 45 seconds. It's like 3 hours of somebody. And you know what? We're going to go ahead and exploit that for ourselves and do the same thing. Yay, capitalism. So,
oh my God.
So anyway, this is what we're positing, right? So this is that idea. Cluster B, right? And we are going to move into places where people are exhibiting ideas of exploitation, right? Or lashing out at rejection or being called out on something. Having a lack of empathy for the populations they're speaking about, and often even speaking to, right? Needing to be at the center of attention, right? You think any YouTubers may qualify for that? Who knows? Maybe we'll do that too, I mean, folks, why else would we be putting out hours of me and Nadine just talking to each other? Like, we're like, hey, we like doing this. We're friends. Let's impose this on society.
Hey, listen, I just happen to think we have some things to say. Like, it's kind of cool that we get together as friends and just like, and colleagues, and like just kind of have these conversations ourselves. And like, it's not like a whole big like, oh, okay, well, we're gonna wait till we go to the conference and then we're gonna talk like this on. It's a thing. It's not a costume. It's who we are. So we just decided to kind of like be that in public.
Yeah. So perhaps there are some checks, some reflexive points along the way that we can keep ourselves checking, right? To make sure that when we're producing content, we're putting it out there, we don't have a lack of empathy. We have empathy,
Yeah.
right? For the populations we're talking about. Maybe we want to put other people at the center of attention rather than us, right? That's talking about Joe Rogan, right? Talking about Joe, like, I admired him for such a long time because he continues to do so, but here's the problem, right? He continues to platform people, like back in the day, he was such a good friend to his friends and brought them along as his popularity increased and brought on stand-up, stand-ups that were people that back in the day I hadn't even heard of. Like, and this one person that I think, I don't know, I think there's probably a community of people who share this. And so guys, yes, I have watched a lot of Joe Rogan back in the day. Ironically, I stopped watching him as the 2016 campaign, as Trump was, shoving people out of the way to get to the presidency. And Joe started to really, even though Bernie was his candidate, that, people make a lot of, like, he endorsed Bernie Sanders, which I was a very big Bernie person too. And, he started to view Donald Trump in a different way and was increasingly sympathetic with a lot of what was happening. And it was cognitively dissonant for me because I was looking and saying, wait, you're validating Trump's humor, because Joe's always big on humor, right? And you can't be, come on, don't be so sensitive. Hey, it's a world of stand-ups. We talk shit about people, right? And yet, like, Trump was saying some really awful shit, right? Like, and it was hurtful, and it was divisive, and it was weird. And the fact that Joe was like, people are just being snowflakes. So he got into this real, like, he was always a bro, and maybe I'm a bro as well, right? So I like that. It's like, yeah, man, do you even lift, bro? I unfortunately haven't lifted in a long time, and I am not. So my fat is anti-bro medicine for me, right? Like, I don't get to be a bro. So when I get in better shape, you guys, if we build Nadine, keep me in check. That's another check. Don't let me
worry.
grow out.
I got you.
As soon as I start having some definition back, my shoulders start popping. So anyway, he platformed really cool people. And he continues to platform people. He is that. He's always been that. People who, like, there's another guy, that Lex Friedman, he is a very big podcaster, and I like a lot of his stuff. And, I won't say this to Lex. Lex did his own work, but if there is a general awareness, there is an awareness that Joe liked Lex and helped him along, and that's awesome, right? But the problem is that Joe is increasingly platforming people who have some really questionable perspectives that are being communicated, including through Joe Rogan's platform of his podcast, kind of unchallenged. Like, there's nobody like if there were like 3 and 3 people, like 3 people were talking. Right. Joe used to do this. He used to even have people who called it, like, no, what? Come on, man. No, that's not, like, just like that. Like, what are you talking about? That's not. And Joe did that. He was like, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Why would you say that? Like, do you have any, like, it was that kind of thing. And it wasn't horrible and fighting and abusive and stuff like that, right? But as people have moved into this space, man, right? Need to be the center of attention, right? Manipulation, disregard for rules, disregard for the rights of others, which pops right back. Narcissistic personality disorder, lack of empathy, which pops up over here to antisocial personality disorder, disregard for the rights of others, there are people who've claimed people, who are incredibly, like, as you're moving more and more right, but it could also be as you're moving more and more left. Anytime you're moving towards a really super radicalized position, right, within a particular group, like this is now categorical, this is the final word, right?
Yeah.
That's when this kind of stuff gets really toxic, right? So like, I think people should kind of understand, like, organizational spaces, group spaces, large spaces, these are spaces that exhibit toxicity that is not disconnected from the individualized behaviors that are informing those spaces, because more and more people are connecting around a particular individual's behavior. And that's what we're getting into, is the idea of the influencer world, right? There perhaps has been a greater democratization of voices if, Nadine, they let you and me in, and that our voices become part of the noise, right? That's democratic. That's right. Awesome, right? We're not being silenced. But then again, there are people being silenced, and there's even self-silencing that's occurring, but not self-silencing, really, that's a confusing way to put it, but people forming their own bubbles, right? And living within those bubbles and not discussing stuff in one. Joe Rogan, his biggest thing for years was, I'm not gonna be scared to put some person on this show that is not popular.
Yeah.
And that was awesome. But there is also a line when we come into, like, this thing is only there. People may even just say all of this is bullshit. Psychology may be bullshit, whatever the case is. But if we have ways of organizing behavior so we can understand it better, folks, think about it that way, bullshit, right? And we're not here to just like throw things at other people in one way or the other. Those individual diagnoses are nuanced, and professionals engage in those diagnoses through a lot of narrative exchange, right? So you can't just be like, that person. But from a qualitative data gathering perspective, you can take hours of content that you watch, and if you know how to organize that data, you can start saying that there are certain themes that are arising out of that perspective, or that the perspective of a person or a collective of people who are engaging in that social media space, right? So Joe Rogan, his guests, so his immediate circle of people that he talks with and exchanges with, and then likely all the people that are supportive of that information dissemination, all of his fans, that entire place or that entire source of people is moving more towards a disregard for rules, disregard for the rights of others, aggressiveness, identity issues, like unstable shifts in those particular spaces, intense emotions, right? There's definitely need to be the center of attention, very sensitive to rejection, right? Feeling of they're all dummies and we are the people who, like, I mean, that was his first thing when he started going anti-social justice warrior, right? Yes, social justice warriors are annoying as fuck. Right? But social justice, or rather social injustice, is neither annoying nor should be disregarded. It is at the center of people bleeding out in this world. Right? So, Nadine.
Well said.
How about we watch a little of this idea about how people move into this kind of space, right? So you were first talking to me about QAnon, right?
Yeah.
You were excited about QAnon. So
yeah.
So tell me, like, this is interesting, right? So in the course of your life, and in the course of your awareness for the past few years, in and around people that you hang with, chill with, talk with, move back and forth with, like so did QAnon not come up a lot for you? Like it didn't rise in that space of awareness?
Not at all, honestly, not at all. And I was completely new to it, like we were talking about it, and I went and did a little bit of research, but like I was just like, at some point I was just like, all right, because I was reading, I wasn't like watching somebody, explain or anything like that, but like I was just reading some things and I'm like, I'm confused. I think I'm going to need a little bit more information, and just kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah. Let's do this, right? So yeah, we're definitely going to do this. So here is Andrew Callahan, our boy, incredible journalist, right? He has this thing, Channel 5, and I wish all news was this beautifully done, because one thing I will say, I don't know much about Andrew's background. I've seen him. I want to watch something. There's an interview that he did with Hassan Piker and a couple of other guys, and I guess he talked a lot about his own life. I only caught like a clip or so of that, but I want to go back and watch the whole thing, because I wonder what kind of training Andrew has had. I mean, my training has been in journalism and communications, in terms of like tools, right? So communications theory, and this whole idea around how people communicate, but then also in narrative methods and development. So how people construct meaning out of the contextual, understanding that they get from talking to people. And this motherfucker does it like he's magic. He just gets people to say such truth about themselves. It's remarkable.
So let me just say, because it's just because it popped into my head. So like one thing I read was just like something about a sex trafficking ring.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
like
yeah
funding. I don't know.
Yeah. There is batshit crazy aplenty about to happen, right? Like so we're definitely going there, but there's also empathy, and Andrew has that empathy, right? Like this lady, I mean, you'll catch it, because you get it. You are an empath. That's why you do peer development work. I operate out of that space. Being an empath doesn't mean you're not a dick. So just in case you guys were wondering, I can be a dick, but I'm also an empath. And this woman, let us watch.
I've kind of been searching for the truth my whole life. And one time I just came across a video.
Just so right there, right? I've kind of been searching for the truth my whole life. That is the key. That is the key. There has been a perfect storm. They talk about those perfect storms, a nor'easter combined with a southern belt disturbance that combined with Hurricane Ida, and all of that became a category 12. It's like all the conditions are right for something big, right? So the conditions are right for this idea that people are having identity issues. People are starting to act out dramatic and feeling different from, feeling distanced from, feeling against, feeling aggressive. There is, like I said, folks, these bullet points don't mean shit, right? I mean, they're just ideas, right? There's just a way to organize. Like I said, the DSM space goes a lot deeper. Emotional expression, this is under histrionic personality disorder, but let's go to a more familiar one for you guys, right? People with narcissistic person, just taking a random one, right, are preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success and power, so much so that they might end up getting lost in their daydreams while they fantasize about their superior intelligence or stunning beauty. folks, that is YouTube content creators. Okay? That is YouTube content creators. And I definitely thought about how this hat looked before I started this stream.
Funny how like it's not like we don't check ourselves here and like comb through.
Yeah, so this is increasing, and so there is a perfect storm of cluster B personalities occupying a space of putting content, putting knowledge out. Like, it's never been so available to speak your truth, as people say, right? There's still marginalization and there's still silencing because there's still, I mean, so there's an idea who definitely, there's a person who talks even about how there are race barriers. Of course there's race barriers. How can there not be race barriers? How can there not be barriers of misogyny? Of course there are. So there's definitely those talking points still exist, but predominantly we're talking about a lot of people getting into this space and having the ability to really speak their mind. And that doesn't just include YouTube. There is TikTok, there's Twitter, there's well-documented incidences of, especially as we're going to move into this space, about how Facebook was the radicalizing mechanism and how QAnon moved on Facebook. That was huge. So let's watch.
That was about Biden and Kamala Harris and Clinton and Obama. They are Satan worshipers, Satanists. They're Satan worshipers, 100%. And I couldn't wait to tell my family. And they just go, they just said, you're crazy, Trump's the worst.
How does that make you feel?
Sad, I cry all the time. But I just keep praying. That's all I do. I just keep praying and asking God to open their eyes. I have a beautiful family. They're just blind.
Which family member do you miss the most?
Probably my baby sister. I told her we're in a spiritual warfare. This is between good and evil, and she rolled her eyes.
What was her name?
Meg. We go and have wine together and lunch together, and it's gone.
You wish you had never stumbled upon.
Once you learn, you don't turn back. I know what God wants of us and what Jesus wants, and it's what Trump wants, and it's what the patriots want. I would never turn back, no matter how many of my family I lose.
What do you think?
It's difficult, right? Because not only like just like having empathy, but also like recognizing that, and like, you know, people that I know personally, you know, just some of that same, you know, line of thinking, like just, you know, from people close to me, and so not, and like, I don't know, it never really hit me before now. Like, I didn't think that there was like a whole school of thought around this, you know, around, like, I had no idea. You know what I mean? Like, if it's just like your personal experience, you can very, very easily be like, oh, you know, that's just, you know, one person that I know that thinks like that. It's not, you know, that big of a deal. It's like easier to normalize, and then to see like, oh no, they're not alone. There's like, this is like a thing that's happening with many people. This is like a way that a lot of people are thinking on things, and like, I don't know, it's a little bit out there and like disheartening, I want to say, really. I was like, especially to hear this woman talk about losing and like almost cry and like about losing out with like time with her family and stuff, like her sister, and like, oh, we used to go and have wine and everything together, and like that's all gone. and she's like really sad about it. But
and
yeah,
she doubled down on the very
No.
thing that like created that wedge.
yeah.
She, you know, because Andrew's saying, but don't
Do
you
you
regret
wish-
this, you know, like in any way?
Right. She
She
interrupted
was
him.
no,
Like
no.
it was just like no.
So I know this, but you speak in the way that you feel comfortable. Like you, I believe, have a similar awareness as we're getting from her of someone in your life that is, you know, you confronted with the truth of, when confronted with the truth of how their actions and effects and influences on your life are very toxic and damaging.
Yeah.
But they recoiled, right? They have resistance. They doubled down back into their what, right? So if this is QAnon, what is their thing? What's their construct called, right? This whole defined space they exist in, that's their reality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, does that feel familiar to you in this case?
Yeah, it definitely feels familiar. Oh, it's a tricky, like, it's such a difficult thing to, like, you know, try and reach, you know, or I always say things like reach or reach out to, but like really just communicate with, you know, how can you compete with that? Like, just like as he was even saying, you know, like with this lady, like just as he was even like introducing another school of thought, like, do you maybe with this emotion that you're feeling, do you maybe connect that to no, shut down like automatically? And that is exactly what I have experienced too, you know, in my life, as not even in my life, as of late, like where I am presenting, you know, information about this is what it's like to deal with you, to be in a relationship with you, or you know what I mean? And that is like, this is what it's like to relate with you and spend time with you, and it's abusive, and let's change that maybe, or not even like let's change that, because I don't have, like, I had to let go of any idea of like, oh, I have control in this situation, you know, as far as what someone else will or will not do. But I could say like, hey, I don't want to live in this way anymore. I recognize that this is what has been my downfall in the past, and what has kept me, you know, from thinking clearly and making decisions that best suit my life, you know, my health and my children's. And like, so I'm backing away from this, and like to be looked at as like the one, you know, like this lady is looking at her, like her family members, like they are like doing the devil's deeds right now. Like they're like
there's a construct that is, it has to be larger than everything in order to, like, they are doing the work of evil. Like, you can literally, religion does this. Religion turns people against one another, you know, the closest people, you know, that brother against brother, you know, kind of thing, and sister against sister. And it's here, right? It's here. It's like it says in narcissistic personality disorder, it's fantasies about all these things, failure to recognize others' needs and feelings, belief that you're special, and was fantasy, belief. If that is constructed to such a deep sense, then how can they destroy, hack away at part of that construct in order to make room for your existence, perceptions, ideas, needs, right?
Yeah.
But like this lady has said, how did people get here? How do individuals get to this place where it is so broadly visible, right? And I invite exchange around this. This is something to really consider in both academic and conversational ways, right? In the sense that if so many people are so empty, disillusioned, broken, traumatized, to want to create larger realities. One can say that people have always been like that. That's why fantasy exists. That's why all those things exist. But here, because of all the connectivity that we have, and there's so many different ways to do it, everything's picking up. RPGs, right? Playing video games across different platforms with different people all over the place. There's so much connection. That's why people are starting to, and have long been developing the means to utterly not only monetize, but control that dynamic, like in the metaverse, where people want belonging and they want meaning, so they go into spaces that are constructed to provide that. Even in, what can we say real life here? There is no, what is real life? Her life is real, but that's what she believes. And there are millions of people like her. Like, you'll see it, man. This goes deep.
Where we going? We go on!
God, Jehovah, you are the most high God. You are the most high
I have been
God.
censored 3 times, disabled, permanently disabled on Facebook. Censored, permanently suspended. They don't like my Q flag. They don't like my Q mobile, and they sure the hell don't like me in my Q Patriot costume.
Where we go one, we go all.
Damn.
I don't even say the M word anymore, right?
What?
The M word. It's a dirty word. It's Now I have my own words instead of the words that I know the algorithms are gonna shut me down.
Can you tell us what words you use for which? We're not going to shut you down.
Mask, the face diaper, vaccine, the jokey pokey, and election fraud. The
Okay. Face diaper funny.
I can't get mad at face diaper. I really can't, because that's exactly how it feels.
Face diaper is fucking hilarious. I totally thought.
I'm sorry. What did he say? The hokey pokey? What did he?
I don't know.
Come
What the
on.
fuck? What is the hokey pokey, bro?
The vaccine. Oh my God.
Oh my god, the hokey pokey, the Fauci ouchie.
obvious fraud. See, people don't understand everything that we've learned from day one has been a lie. We never were on the moon. No, I don't think the Hitler situation is as bad as they said.
Oh my god, the Hitler situation.
When did it just become a situation? Did he not? I wasn't great. Wait, I wasn't great at history. Okay, I was not.
Yeah.
But I paid close attention to that. The Hitler situation. It was a little bit more than a situation. Can I just say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hunting down human beings, using them for occultic, ritualized, weird medical experimentation shit, and then ultimately just exterminating an entire population of people. I mean, the Hitler situation and that European rape of Africa slavery situation, those situations are troubling to be sure, but they are situations, and we can probably arrive at some understanding about those situations. The Hitler situation, that's brilliant. All right, I love this.
Was either. That was the Rothschilds, that was the Rockefellers. Those are naughty words in social media. I got banned forever on Facebook.
You're watching Channel 5.
After a hectic few weeks on the road, covering events like the Pickup Artist Boot Camp in Las Vegas,
America is back open, baby. It's makeout time.
and creating my first solo doc.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna go. I think. Okay, all right. the pickup artist idea is actually really important because of it's a similar the pickup artist path is very closely aligned to the QAnon path. They're still about these cluster B disorders, right? That when any filter of what the fuck are you doing is removed from a person's consciousness, right? You get nightmare fuel like this, man. It's crazy. Like people, they're the belief in specialness, right? That's it is a powerful drug. These are powerful drugs, right?
That's like getting into like that individualism, like that, like
100%. Yeah.
Sorry.
Individualism,
on drugs.
Individualism crack is exactly what I mean. It's like Rick James said, individualism. It's a hell of a drug. You know, or he said cocaine, but
that's right. That's
too.
right.
Yeah.
But that works.
Documentary about two twins in Marin City, California.
We've been everywhere and on every bitch.
Hey, bitch, I'm in my mode. Money turn me on.
We've been everywhere and on every bitch.
Oh my god. Okay. I'm ready.
Oh my god. Yeah, Andrew does remarkable work.
I decided to dive back into the world of right-wing politics. That's when I discovered the God and Country Patriot Roundup, a 3-day event in Dallas which cost $3,000, not including a stay at the Omni Hotel in Dallas, which cost an additional $1,000. What I found there was a couple hundred patriots with one thing in common.
I have been banned from Facebook, Instagram.
They all have $5,000 to splurge, not to mention the drinks that are and everything else and all the merch. Holy crap, dude. That's great. That's great. The Patriot Roundup. Why can't we do a roundup of some
consciousness
group of
roundup.
people, right? That's all this is. It's tribalism and people grifting, like making mad money off of tribal politics. That's amazing, dude. It's amazing.
Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. This is Joe Biden's daughter's diary. I used to make videos like reading it out loud.
I've lost 2 YouTube channels, 3 Twitters, and 4 Facebooks. Every time it's like, yes, I'm winning.
Why'd you get banned?
The so-called Pizzagate conspiracy theory.
Well, first of all, I had like 300,000 subscribers on YouTube. The last couple of videos I did were all about the Hunter Biden laptop issue. Within 48 hours of putting those out, they just deleted my channel right away. And then within 2 weeks of that, I was deleted off of Twitter as well.
Yes, we were recently kicked off Twitter because of a confrontation I did with the VP of Integrity at Facebook.
If we weren't making a difference, if it wasn't that important, why would they spend so much effort and energy into it?
I mean, all of Silicon.
You hear that? Like, if we weren't right about it, if this wasn't important, why would they come at us so hard? Right? I mean, the other side of that, where maybe if you just pull back out, like zoom back out a little bit, and you see it as maybe people are coming hard, is because a lot of dangerous things, circumstances, situations are happening, that are fueled by misinformation or even information that may have some merit, but is being purposely distorted to be able to charge people $5,000 plus merch, plus everything else to come to this place where everyone is just like, it's a professionally organized situation. I'm just going to keep saying situation now because that guy's fantastic. Like the Hitler situation. But this, I don't know, racism situation or this othering definitely not all white people situation that is occurring here. White people coming together to complain about the marginalization of their lives, but they can come together because all of them, each individual you see on this screen has $5,000 to blow. I don't have $5,000, or if I have $5,000, it needs to go into my son's mouth in braces rather than $5,000. Or if you have $5,000, it's the car you need so you don't have to take the bus to go everywhere.
Right.
You know, and
thinking that.
We'll talk about the oppression of what that is in terms of society creating barriers for people to actually
get where they need to
out
go
of their lives. But those aren't realities, because as these people are about to say, those ideas are illusions created to keep down the white man. How's that? Like, does that resonate okay? You look at your face.
Mali is like run by the Chinese, so.
We're in war. It's no different than what they were doing to the Jews and different things. They silence them. They're just doing it through social media and electronically now.
It's a war of the minds. It's psychological, right? It's emotional.
Jewish genocide and
your account being deleted.
Yes, requiring people with rhinestone hats to wear masks during a global pandemic. Like, that's the this is beautiful work. Look at that. You know she did that.
I have a hat like that. I'm not gonna
yeah. I mean, yeah. I love it.
Awesome.
I love the problem is at a lot of these rallies, I gotta say something. Some of these rallies, these Trump rallies and like QAnon, especially actually QAnon, they've got some good merch, man. Like, you know, I'm a merch head, right? Like, you know, I'll just get a sweatshirt, man. I want to like just wear a cool sweatshirt, and like some of their shit looks so good, but it's like just so, you know, like, you know, if I just walked around with a shirt, like, you know, it's like N-words should have never left the fields, American flag.
Oh
like,
my God.
But like, you know, I don't think people would take it non-ironically. They are good designs, though, man. They come up with some really good designs.
It's mental. It's actually worse than having bullets and missiles.
The only real difference between woke supremacists and the Nazi supremacists, the white supremacists, the Old South, is the technology available to them. They don't need to put the Jews, the other, into ghettos, because they can now electronically ghettoize us. They, in fact, this Jew is electronically ghettoized. They have removed my voice from the community. I am endlessly being imprisoned in Zuckerberg's gulags. And again, it serves exactly the same purpose as Stalin's gulags. Hey, woke people, wake up. It's pretty ridiculous to be outraged by a misgendered toy plastic potato. It's pretty ridiculous to be outraged by the shape of a syrup jar shaped in the design of a beloved black ant.
Are you talking about Mr. Potato Head and Aunt Jemima?
Potato Head and Aunt Jemima.
What did he say? What?
Oh my God!
I'm confused with Mrs. Butterworth. First off,
beloved black ant.
Like, it's shaped. It's not shaped.
Oh my God!
What? Because she's.
No, he's thinking about the Butterworth. That was Aunt Jemima. He's thinking
that
about
was Aunt Jemima.
Butterworth.
It wasn't about the shape of the bottle.
Right.